The Hall of Eternal Flames fell silent when Empress Salith Ravaranis raised her hand to dismiss the third suitor in a row. The Dominion Council members shifted uneasily in their crystalline seats, their bioluminescent crests flickering between shame and barely contained fury. No one had dared reject 3 noble houses in a single ceremony before, not even an empress. "Your Radiance," Chancellor Orthan spoke carefully, his deep voice reverberating through the hall's acoustics. "With the utmost respect, the bonding season ends in 40 cycles. The Dominion cannot what, Chancellor?" Salith's voice was cold, measured. The kind of cold that precedes an extinction-level event. "Cannot survive without me being bred to some lordling who sees my throne before he sees me." Orthan lowered his gaze. His crest dimmed to a submissive violet. The court dissolved into a symphony of whispered outrage. Salith stood from the throne of living stone, a seat that had grown around the spines of 27 empresses before her, and walked down the steps with the kind of deliberate grace that warned everyone to stay exactly where they were. She was tall, even by Voronith standards. Nearly 7 feet of pale silver skin traced with natural patterns of deep indigo that mapped her noble bloodline across her shoulders and throat like a living genealogy. Her 4 eyes, 2 large, 2 smaller above them, carried the weight of a woman who had been stared at her entire life and had learned to stare back harder. But none of them saw what she hid behind those eyes. The exhaustion, the loneliness that had calcified into something that resembled strength but was really just scar tissue. 3 months earlier, her mother had died. Empress Vorith Ravaranis, the undying flame, had turned out to be very much capable of dying. A degenerative neural condition that the court physicians had hidden for 2 years. Hidden from everyone except the daughter who had watched her mother forget her own name, 1 syllable at a time. Now Salith wore the crown, and the first thing the Dominion demanded of her was a mate. Not a partner. Not a companion. A political asset with compatible genetics. She reached the bottom of the steps and stopped before the massive viewport that dominated the hall's far wall. Beyond it, the stars burned in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the politics of empresses. "Bring me the next candidate," she said without turning. "Your Radiance." Orthan hesitated. "There are no more Dominion candidates. You have rejected every eligible noble of rank. Then we are done for the day." "We are not done." This voice was different. Harder. Lady Cathara Rasalanth, Salith's aunt and head of the Imperial Advisory, stepped forward. She was shorter than her niece, but carried herself like a blade, all edge and purpose. "The Dominion Charter is clear. An unbonded empress is a constitutional vulnerability. If you will not choose from within, the Council will exercise its right to arrange." Salith turned slowly. "You would force my hand, Aunt. I would save this empire from your grief, child." Cathara's voice softened, but only by a fraction. "Your mother understood duty. My mother died alone in a room full of physicians who called her your Radiance while she screamed for someone to hold her hand." Salith's voice did not break. It simply became something no one in the room could look at directly. "Do not speak to me about what my mother understood." The silence that followed was absolute. Cathara held her niece's gaze for a long moment, then inclined her head. "Not submission. Acknowledgement. Then at least consider the alternatives. The Galactic Concord reception is in 6 cycles. There will be representatives from every member species. Perhaps a broader perspective." Salith almost laughed. A broader perspective. The Voronith Dominion had spent 3,000 years building the most rigid social hierarchy in the known galaxy, and her aunt was suggesting she shop for a mate at a diplomatic cocktail party. "Fine," she said, because she was tired, and because the only alternative was a council-arranged bonding with some distant cousin whose greatest achievement was not drooling during state dinners. "I will attend." She left the hall before anyone could respond. 6 cycles later, the reception aboard the Concord station was everything Salith expected. A dazzling display of interspecies diplomacy that barely concealed the territorial negotiations happening in every corner. She moved through the crowd like a glacier through a field of flowers, her 2 Imperial guards flanking her at regulation distance, her ceremonial gown trailing threads of woven light behind her. Everyone stared. Everyone always stared. The Kreth ambassador bowed so deeply his horns nearly scraped the floor. The Solari delegation presented a gift of crystallized starlight that probably cost more than a small moon. 3 different species attempted to introduce eligible partners with varying degrees of subtlety. Saleth accepted each gesture with practiced grace, and felt absolutely nothing. She was about to signal her guards to prepare for departure, when she heard it. A sound so unexpected in this setting that her 4 eyes all focused on the same point simultaneously. Laughter. Genuine, unrestrained laughter. It came from a small table near the observation deck's edge, far from the main social cluster. A human male sat there with 2 Kreth junior diplomats, apparently in the middle of a story that involved animated hand gestures and sound effects. He was unremarkable by most galactic standards. Average height for his species, which made him almost comically short compared to the Voronith around him. Brown skin, dark hair cropped close, a face that was more weathered than handsome. He wore a dress uniform that was clean but clearly not new, with a rank insignia she didn't recognize. But the Kreth diplomats, a species notorious for their dour disposition, were genuinely laughing. One of them was wiping tears from his secondary eyes. Saleth found herself walking toward the table before she made a conscious decision to do so. Her guards' crests flared in surprise, but they followed. The crowd parted automatically. People always moved for an empress, whether they knew she was one or not. Something about the way a person carries the weight of an empire communicates itself without words. As she approached, the human looked up. His eyes, just 2 of them, brown and unremarkably ordinary, met hers. She watched for the recognition. The widening of pupils. The sudden stiffness. The immediate recalibration from person to power. It didn't come. He looked at her the way he might look at anyone who had walked up to his table. With mild curiosity, and an open expression that suggested he was perfectly willing to include her in the conversation if she wanted to be included. "Can I help you?" he asked. In standard Galactic, but with an accent that softened the harsh consonants. The Kreth diplomats had frozen. They knew who she was. Their crests were cycling through every shade of deference their biology could produce. "Your radiance," one of them stammered, rising so quickly he knocked over his drink. "We did not. This is Empress Saleth Ravaranis of the Voronith Dominion. You should—" "Oh." The human stood. Not with the frantic urgency of someone who'd been caught disrespecting royalty. Just politely. The way you stand when someone new joins the table. "I'm sorry, I'm not great with everyone's titles yet. I'm Elias. Elias Croft. Cultural Liaison, Terran Diplomatic Corps." He extended his hand, then caught himself. "Sorry, is handshaking appropriate for your species, or?" Saleth stared at his extended hand. In 3,000 years of Voronith diplomatic history, no one had ever offered her bloodline a handshake. Bows. Prostrations. Ritual gift exchanges. Never something as absurdly egalitarian as a handshake. "It is not customary," she said. "Right. Sorry." He lowered his hand with an easy smile. No embarrassment. No groveling. "Well, we were just talking about the time I accidentally insulted a Solari elder by complimenting his daughter's singing. Apparently that's a grave offense because singing is considered a private." He stopped. "I'm sorry. Would you like to sit down? You look like you've been standing in heels for about 6 hours too long." One of the Kreth made a sound like a small animal being stepped on. "I am not wearing heels," Saleth said. "Metaphorical heels. The kind that come with being the most important person in a room full of people who want things from you." She studied him for a long moment. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He didn't do any of the things that every bee in every room she'd ever entered had done when she held their gaze. He just waited, like she was a person deciding whether or not to sit down, and whatever she decided was fine with him. Saleth sat. The Kreth diplomats excused themselves with a haste that bordered on teleportation. "So," Elias said, settling back into his chair. "Rough night." She should have been offended. An empress is not asked about her night by a low-ranking diplomatic attaché from a species that had only achieved faster-than-light travel 40 years ago. The proper response was a cold dismissal, a reminder of station, a wall of protocol. Instead, she said, "You have no idea." And for the first time in months, it wasn't a lie. They talked. Not about politics or alliances or bonding rituals. He told her about Earth, a planet so chaotic and contradictory that it sounded like a work of absurdist fiction. He told her about something called coffee that his species was biologically dependent on, and about a communication form called sarcasm that most translator systems couldn't handle. He told her about his daughter. Her name was Maya, he said, and the past tense settled over the table like a sudden change in atmospheric pressure. Saleth waited. She was good at waiting. She was 7. There was an accident on the colony transport to Proxima. Hull breach in the residential section. His voice didn't break. It did something worse. It went perfectly, carefully flat. I was in the engine compartment. Sealed bulkheads. Standard protocol. I could hear her on the comm for about 40 seconds. The observation deck's ambient light painted shifting nebula patterns across his face. He looked older suddenly. Not in years, but in the way that a landscape looks different after a fire has passed through it. Sorry, Saleth said. And she meant it in a way she hadn't meant anything in a very long time. Yeah. He cleared his throat. So, you're a rough night. Want to talk about it? She almost did. She almost told this strange, small, impossibly direct human about her mother, and the crown, and the suitors who looked at her throne and called it love. She almost told him that she hadn't slept more than 3 hours at a time since the coronation, and that sometimes in the dark of her quarters, she pressed her hand against the wall and pretended it was pressing back. Instead, she said, perhaps another time. Sure. He smiled. It was a tired smile, but it was real. I'll be at the Concord station for another month. Cultural liaison duties. If you ever want to sit at the unpopular table again, I'm usually here around this time. Saleth rose. Her guards materialized at her sides. The weight of the Empress settled back onto her shoulders like armor. Thank you for the conversation, Elias Croft. Anytime he paused. Actually, I never caught your first name. Just the title, Saleth. Saleth. Thank you for the conversation, Saleth. No one called her by her name. Not without the bloodline prefix, not without the honorific chain, not without the linguistic architecture of deference that the Voronith language had spent millennia constructing. He spoke to her like she was just a woman. She carried that thought back to her ship like a stolen ember, turning it over and over in the dark. Saleth returned to the unpopular table 4 days later. She told herself it was because the Concord station's diplomatic circuit was tedious, and she needed a break from the endless parade of ambassadors trying to leverage her presence. She told herself it was strategic. Humans were new to the galactic stage, and understanding their cultural attachés was simple intelligence gathering. She did not tell herself the truth, which was that she hadn't stopped thinking about the way Elias Croft had said her name. He was there, as promised, eating something from a small container that smelled aggressively herbal. That's pesto pasta, he said when he caught her looking. It's terrible. The station's food synthesizers think basil is a kind of algae. But it's the closest thing to home cooking I've got, so. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. Welcome back to the unpopular table. I do not understand why you call it that, Saleth said, sitting with more grace than should be possible for someone her height. Because it's far from the action, the lighting is bad, and the only people who sit here are those who've given up trying to impress anyone. He pointed his fork at her, which raises some interesting questions about why an empress keeps showing up. Perhaps I enjoy bad lighting. Terrible reason. Try again. Her secondary eyes narrowed, a Voronith expression of surprised amusement that most other species misread as irritation. You are remarkably irreverent for someone addressing the sovereign ruler of 9 star systems. Yeah, I've been told that. My supervisor back on Earth once said I have a pathological inability to recognize social hierarchy. It was not meant as a compliment. He took another bite of his terrible pasta. But, honestly, I figure you get enough reverence. Probably drowning in it. What you look like you need is someone to talk to who isn't calculating the political value of every word. She said nothing for a moment. Then, you presume to know what I need. I presume nothing. I observe. There's a difference. He set down his fork. You sat at this table the first time because you were curious. You came back because something about the first time felt different. I'm guessing not many things feel different for you anymore. The accuracy of it was almost offensive. You are a cultural liaison, she said, redirecting. What does that entail, exactly? Mostly I help human diplomats not accidentally start wars, which happens more often than you'd think. He leaned back. Humans are messy communicators. We say one thing, mean another, and assume everyone else is doing the same. My job is to translate not just languages but intentions. To help people understand each other. And you are good at this? I'm adequate. I'm here because I volunteered for deep space postings after. He stopped. After Maya. The words hung unspoken. Because I wanted to be far from home for a while. Running away. Walking purposefully in the opposite direction. There's a distinction. Seelith almost smiled. She caught it before it reached her lips. A lifetime of court training. But her secondary eyes betrayed her, shifting to the warm amber that indicated pleasure. Elias noticed. She could tell by the slight softening around his eyes. But he didn't comment on it, didn't draw attention to this small crack in her composure. He simply moved the conversation forward, giving her the space to be unguarded without making a spectacle of it. They talked for 2 hours. He asked her questions that no one asked, not about the Dominion's military capacity or trade policies, but about what she liked, what Voronith music sounded like, whether her species dreamed, what her favorite place in the Empire was. There is a moon, she found herself saying, in the Aethon system. It has no strategic value, no resources worth mining. It is simply beautiful. Crystalline formations that sing when the solar wind passes through them. My mother took me there when I was young, before the court decided every moment of my life required witnesses. Sounds peaceful. It was. She paused. She used to hold my hand while we listened. Voronith do not typically engage in casual physical contact. It is considered intimate, reserved for bonded pairs and parent-child relationships during formative years. But my mother was not typical. Sounds like someone I would have liked. She would have found you baffling, Seelith said. And then, I think, entertaining. The silence that followed was comfortable. Not the rigid silence of court, where every pause was a tactical maneuver. This was the silence of two people who had discovered they could sit together without needing to fill every moment with performance. Elias, she said as she prepared to leave. Why did you not react when you learned who I was? At the first meeting, everyone else showed deference, fear, calculation. You showed nothing. He considered this. That's not exactly true. I showed you basic courtesy. The same courtesy I'd show anyone. I think what surprised you wasn't the absence of a reaction, it was the absence of a performance. And why is that? Because where I come from, a person's title tells you their job. It doesn't tell you who they are. I'd rather figure out the second part first. She held his gaze. 4 eyes meeting too. A galaxy of difference between them. And yet, in this moment, the distance felt navigable. Good night, Elias. Good night, Seelith. The meetings became regular. Every 3 days, then every 2, then daily. Always at the unpopular table. Always without ceremony. The court noticed. You are spending time with a human, Kithara said during a secure communication, her holographic image flickering with poorly concealed displeasure. A low-ranking human. I am conducting cultural research. You are sitting in a corner with a Terran man eating synthetic food and laughing, Seelith. My intelligence reports are quite detailed. Then your intelligence operatives need more productive assignments. Kithara's crest stiffened. The council is watching. Lord Vathis has formally complained that you are dishonoring the bonding process by fraternizing with a lesser species. Lord Vathis once confused a decorative fountain for a lavatory at the Kreth embassy. His opinions on honor are not my primary concern. This is not a joke. The council will move against you if you give them reason. Then they will learn what my mother learned, that I am not easily moved. Seelith ended the communication before Kithara could respond. But the warning settled into her bones. The council could not depose her. The throne of living stone would not accept another until she died or abdicated. But they could isolate her. Strip her executive powers, turn her into a ceremonial figurehead. It had happened before, 3 centuries ago, to an emperor who had defied bonding conventions. She went to the unpopular table that evening carrying this weight, and found Elias already there, reading something on a datapad. You look like someone just told you the heat death of the universe has been moved up, he said. My council is unhappy with me. Join the club. My supervisor just told me I'm diplomatically unpredictable. She meant it as a warning. Are you? Unpredictable? Consistently. He set down the datapad. What's the council's problem? She hesitated. The truth was dangerous. But she had been carrying dangerous truths alone for months, and the weight was becoming structural. "You?" she said. "You are the problem. Or rather, my association with you. An empress spending time with a human of no political standing is, in their view, an embarrassment." She watched for the reaction. The hurt. The withdrawal. The sudden awareness of the gap between them that she had been so carefully ignoring. Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is it an embarrassment to you?" "No." The word came out faster and more forcefully than she intended. It hung in the air between them, glowing with a truth she hadn't fully acknowledged until it escaped. "Okay," he said simply. "Then I guess the question is what you want to do about it. Because I'm not going to pretend we're not." He searched for the word. "Whatever we are. But I'm also not going to be the reason your empire falls apart. You overestimate your importance. Probably. But I'd rather overestimate and be careful than underestimate and cause damage." She looked at him, this small, fragile, absurdly mortal creature who had somehow become the most honest thing in her life. Humans lived, what, 80 years? A fraction of a Voronith lifetime. He would grow old and die while she was still in middle age. Every rational calculation said this was foolish. "I want you to attend the Empress's reception," she said. "In 9 days. On my homeworld." His eyebrows rose. "That sounds official." "It is. The reception is traditionally where an empress presents potential bondmates to the court for consideration." She held his gaze. "I am not saying that is what this is. I'm saying that I want you there. As my guest. And that the court will interpret it however they choose." "Salith." His voice was careful now but not afraid. "You know what that would mean. For your people. For the council. For you. I'm aware. And you want to do it anyway? I want one honest person in the room. Is that so terrible?" He studied her face for a long time. She let him. It was strange, allowing someone to truly look at her, not at the crown, not the bloodline patterns on her skin, not at the political machinery she represented, just at her. "Okay," he said. "But I should warn you, I only have the one dress uniform, and it has a coffee stain on the left cuff that I've been pretending is a design element. It will be the least offensive thing the court encounters that evening." He laughed. She felt it in her chest, a warmth that had no Voronith name because her species had never needed one. They had words for duty warmth and alliance warmth and bloodline warmth. But not this. Not the warmth of choosing someone simply because they made the world less heavy. As she stood to leave, her hand brushed his on the table. Accidentally. Or perhaps not. The contact lasted less than a second, his skin warm and soft against her cooler, smoother fingers. Neither of them mentioned it. But she felt the ghost of it all the way back to her ship, and she pressed her hand against the wall of her quarters that night, and for the first time, it wasn't pretending that made her feel less alone. The Empress's reception was held in the Palace of Convergence, a structure that had been grown, not built, over 600 years from the living crystal that was unique to the Voronith homeworld. Its walls shifted color with the emotional resonance of those within it, a feature that made political gatherings particularly revealing for those who knew how to read the architecture. Tonight, the walls were cycling through shades of tense violet and suspicious amber. 300 of the Dominion's most powerful figures filled the grand resonance hall, their crests and formal attire representing enough political capital to reshape a quadrant. Lord Vathis had positioned himself near the entrance, his silver-white crest displayed at full aggressive extension. Lady Morith, head of the Commerce Guild, watched from the upper gallery with the patient calculation of someone who had survived 4 empresses. Chancellor Orthon stood near the throne, his expression carefully neutral, his crest a disciplined slate gray. And then there was Elias. He stood near the viewport wall in his one-dress uniform, coffee stain carefully positioned away from direct light, and looked exactly like what he was, a human entirely out of his depth who had decided to swim anyway. Salith watched him from across the hall as she moved through the required greeting rituals. She watched him shake hands with a confused Kreth noble. The Kreth attempted to reciprocate and accidentally crushed a drink glass. She watched him bow to Lady Kithara, with a sincerity that momentarily disarmed even her aunt's legendary composure. She watched him stand at the edge of conversations he couldn't possibly follow and listen with the same genuine attention he gave to everything. He was going to be destroyed here. The thought clenched in her chest like a fist. "Your radiance, Lord Vathis intercepted her with a bow that was technically correct but dripped with condescension. What a fascinating choice of guest. I was unaware the Terrans had progressed beyond their initial observation period. Is this one here as a representative or a curiosity, Lord Vathis? Your crest is at full display. I was not aware this was a dominance occasion. His crest retracted slightly, the involuntary response of being called out. Merely expressing the court's surprise. An unbonded empress, a bonding reception, and the only unattached guest is a human male of no rank, no lineage, and no political value. Surely you can understand the confusion. I understand it perfectly. I simply don't share it. She moved past him before he could respond, but the damage was done. She could feel the whisper network activating, the subtle shifts in posture and crest color that meant the court was choosing sides. Seelith reached the raised platform at the hall's center and addressed the assembly. My honored guests. The Empress's reception is traditionally an occasion of possibility, a moment when the sovereign invites the Dominion to witness the beginning of a bond that will shape the Empire's future. She paused, letting the formal cadence settle over the crowd. Tonight, I exercise a sovereign prerogative that has not been invoked in 400 years. I present a guest of personal distinction, not of bloodline or rank, but of character. Elias Croft, cultural liaison of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. The silence was volcanic. Elias walked forward. Seelith could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight tightness around his jaw. He was afraid, but he walked anyway, steady and unhurried. And when he reached the platform, he looked up at her with those two brown eyes and gave her a small nod. Not a bow, a nod. The acknowledgement of an equal. The walls of the palace shifted to a deep, uncertain blue. This is an insult, Lord Vathis' voice cut through the silence. He stepped forward, his crest now fully extended in open challenge. A lesser species, on the presentation platform, the Voronith bonding tradition is sacred. It is the foundation of our Lord Vathis. Elias's voice was calm. Quiet even, but it carried. I'm sorry. I don't know all your customs yet, and I mean no disrespect. But where I come from, when someone invites you somewhere, you show up. That's it. I'm not here to claim anything or insult anyone. I'm here because I was invited. You presume to address me directly, human? I'm addressing the room, sir. Because I think there's been a misunderstanding about what I represent. He glanced at Seelith, then back at the assembly. I'm not a political statement. I'm not a provocation. I'm a guy who lost his daughter 2 years ago, and found someone who understood what it felt like to lose someone you can't get back. That's all this is. The crystal walls flickered, a confused ripple of colors that suggested the building itself didn't know what to make of this. Kythera stepped forward. Her expression was unreadable, but her crest was a controlled, thoughtful gray. You speak of loss as a qualification. In the Dominion, loss is private. It is not displayed, I know. And I respect that. But I've learned that sometimes the things we keep private are the things that most need to be shared. He looked at Seelith again, not because it fixes anything, just because carrying it alone is heavier than it needs to be. Something shifted in the room. Not a political shift, something more fundamental. Several nobles whose crests had been displaying hostile colors found them involuntarily softening. The crystal walls bloomed with a pale, uncertain warmth. Then Lord Vathis made his move. I invoke the right of questioning, he declared. As a senior lord of the council, I demand the human prove his worth to stand on the presentation platform. Let him demonstrate what he offers the Dominion beyond sentiment. Murmurs cascaded through the hall. The right of questioning was ancient, a ritual challenge where potential bondmates were tested by the court. It was brutal, designed for Voronith nobles trained from birth in politics, combat philosophy, and imperial law. It would destroy Elias. Seelith stepped forward. The right of questioning is intended for anyone who stands on that platform, Vathis interrupted. And he was technically correct. The law made no species distinction. Unless the Empress wishes to withdraw her guest, that, of course, would be a formal admission that he is unworthy. Trap. Perfectly executed. It's okay, Elias said quietly, so only Seelith could hear. Let him ask. You don't know what this involves. I know what backing down would cost you, so let him ask. She held his gaze. The fear was still there, in the slight tremor of his hands at his sides. But so was something else. A stubbornness she recognized because she saw it in her own reflection every morning. She stepped back. Vathis smiled, the Voronith expression that showed too many teeth to be anything but predatory. Very well. Human. The first question of the right. What do you possess that elevates you above your station? Nothing, Elias said. A ripple of shock. Nothing elevates me above my station, because I don't believe in stations. Where I come from, where humanity comes from, we spent most of our history building hierarchies, and the most important thing we ever learned was how to question them. I'm not above or below anyone in this room. I'm beside them. That's where I prefer to be. Vathis' crest flickered with something that might have been uncertainty before he pressed on. The second question. What would you sacrifice for the Dominion? I don't know yet. I can't make promises about sacrifices I haven't been asked to make. But I can tell you what I've already sacrificed. Not for the Dominion, but for the people I love. I've sacrificed my pride, my comfort, my need to be right. And once, on a transport ship, I sacrificed the chance to hold my daughter one last time. Because protocol demanded I stay at my post to save 300 other people. His voice held steady, but his eyes were bright. I don't know what the Dominion needs from me, but I know I don't make promises I can't keep. The hall was utterly still. Vathis rallied. The final question. Why should the Dominion trust a species that has existed on the galactic stage for less than half a century? Your people are infants. What wisdom could you possibly, Lord Vathis? Elias's voice changed. Not louder. Deeper. The voice of a man who had stopped performing and started simply telling the truth. You're right. Humanity is young. We are new and small, and we make mistakes constantly. But we've learned one thing in our short, messy, painful history that I think has value. Love is not a weakness. Caring about someone, truly caring, without strategy or agenda, is the hardest and bravest thing any conscious being can do. Your species has built an incredible civilization on duty and hierarchy and discipline. Those are strengths. But you've also built a system where your empress can't grieve her mother without it being a political vulnerability. Where she can't sit at a table and talk to someone without it becoming a scandal. He turned to face Salith, and his eyes held hers with a tenderness that made the palace walls bloom deep rose. She doesn't need someone worthy. She needs someone honest. Salith felt something crack behind her sternum. Not breaking, opening. Like a door she'd sealed shut was being pushed from both sides. The silence stretched. Then Cathara spoke. The right of questioning is concluded. The guest has answered. Vathis opened his mouth to object, but the room had turned against him. He could feel it in the walls. The crystal was cycling through shades of contemplative gold and tentative warmth. The court had not decided to accept Elias, but it had decided to stop attacking him. In Voronith politics, that was a seismic shift. The reception continued, but the energy had changed. Nobles who had been hostile were now curious. Several approached Elias with careful questions about Earth, about human customs, about the concept of love as he had described it, a word for which standard Voronith had no direct translation. Salith watched him navigate it all from across the room, and the crack in her chest continued to widen. Later, when the crowds had thinned and the palace walls had settled into a quiet, contemplative violet, she found him on a balcony overlooking the crystal gardens. The moonlight caught the living structures below, sending fractured rainbows across his face. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yeah, I did. Vathis could have destroyed you. Politically, perhaps literally, the right of questioning has historically included physical challenges. Glad I didn't know that beforehand. He half smiled. I just answered honestly. That's all I've got, Salith. I don't have rank or power or a bloodline that impresses anyone. I just have this. He gestured vaguely at himself. A banged-up widower from a young species who happens to think you're the most remarkable person he's ever met, and who is absolutely terrified of what that means. You are terrified. You're an empress. I'm a guy with a coffee-stained uniform. This doesn't make sense by any rational metric. No, she agreed. It doesn't. They stood in silence, watching the crystal gardens sing in the moonlight. Then, slowly, so slowly that either of them could have stopped it, Salith extended her hand. Not palm down, as was customary for an empress receiving obeisance. Palm up, open, offering. Elias looked at her hand. He understood. She could see it in his face, the recognition that this gesture for her species was not casual. That offering an open hand was an act of vulnerability that most Voronith never performed outside of bonding ceremonies. He placed his hand in hers. Her fingers closed around his, cool silver against warm brown. The contact sent a cascade of sensation through her sensory network that she had no framework to process. It was nothing like the clinical descriptions of bonding touch she had studied. It was messier, warmer, more frightening. "Your hand is shaking," he said softly. "Yes, mine too." They stood there, two people from opposite ends of a galaxy, holding hands on a balcony while the crystal gardens sang, and the palace walls around them turned the deepest, most luminous shade of rose they had displayed. In 300 years. The crisis came, as crises do, without the courtesy of warning. Sealith was in the Imperial War Room when the transmission arrived. A fleet of the Thessari warships had entered Dominion space near the Aethon system. The same system. The moon with the singing crystals. Her mother's moon. 14 capital ships. Admiral Rethus reported, his crest rigid with battle readiness. "They're not hailing. They've taken up bombardment positions around the mining colonies on Aethon's third planet. The Thessari dispute our claim to the Aethon mineral deposits," Orthon explained. "They've been pressing through diplomatic channels for 2 years. It seems they've decided diplomacy has run its course." The war room erupted in overlapping voices. Military strategies, diplomatic options, historical precedents. Sealith listened, processed, commanded. This was her training. This was what the crown demanded. But beneath the Empress, the woman was thinking of singing crystals, and a hand pressed into hers. "Orthan. Open a channel to the Thessari fleet commander. I will negotiate directly. Your Radiance, the Thessari do not recognize personal negotiation with heads of state. They consider it a sign of desperation." "I know. Open the channel." The Thessari commander who appeared on screen was massive even by their species standards. 8 feet of chitinous armor plating and compound eyes that reflected the war room's lights like broken mirrors. "Empress of the Voronith," the commander said, his mandibles clicking in the characteristic Thessari speech pattern. "You honor us with direct communication. We assumed you would send subordinates. I do not delegate when my people's lives are at stake, Commander. Why have you entered Dominion space? The Aethon deposits are contested. Your council has stalled negotiations for 23 months. We are expediting. By threatening civilian mining colonies, by demonstrating resolve. A concept your species once understood before you began entertaining lesser species at your court." The dig was pointed. News of the Empress's reception had spread. "The deposits can be negotiated," Sealith said. "But not under the shadow of weapons. Withdraw to the border, and I will personally. We will not withdraw. You have 1 rotation cycle to cede the Aethon mineral rights, or we begin targeted strikes on the mining infrastructure. We have no desire to harm civilians, but we will not guarantee their safety if they remain in the operational zone." The channel closed. Silence. Then Admiral Rethus spoke. "Our fleet can be at Aethon in 6 cycles. Faster if we bypass the supply route at 6 cycles. The deadline is 1. Sealith closed her eyes. "What do we have in the Aethon system currently? A defense station, minimal armament. 2 patrol corvettes. And..." Rethus checked his display. "A Terran diplomatic vessel. The TDV, Patience. It was conducting a cultural survey of the outer moons." Sealith's blood went cold. "Get me the manifest of that vessel." She already knew, but she needed to hear it. "Cultural survey team, 6 members, led by..." Rethus paused. "Elias Croft. Terran Cultural Liaison. The war room continued its urgent deliberations around her, but for a moment, Sealith heard nothing but the singing of crystals and felt nothing but the phantom warmth of a hand in hers. "Get him out of there," she said. "Contact the Patience. Order them to withdraw immediately. Your Radiance, we cannot prioritize a single vessel. I am not asking, Admiral." The communication officer worked frantically. "Then, Your Radiance, the Patience is not responding to withdrawal orders. They've moved into a position between the Thessari fleet and the mining colony on Aethon 3. "What?" The display updated. "A single, impossibly small Terran diplomatic vessel, unarmed, unarmored, designed for surveys and cultural missions, had positioned itself directly in the firing line of 14 Thessari capital ships. "They're hailing the Thessari," the comm officer reported, bewildered. "Put it through, all channels." Elias's voice filled the war room. "Thessari Fleet Commander, this is Elias Croft of the Terran Diplomatic Corps aboard the TDV Patience. I am positioning my vessel between your fleet and the civilian population of Aethon 3. I am unarmed. I am not a combatant, but I am here, and I am not moving." The Thessari commander's response was sharp. "Human, you are irrelevant to this dispute. Move your vessel or it will be moved for you." "I understand. But here's the thing. If you fire on a civilian mining colony, that's a territorial dispute. Messy. But the galaxy has seen it before. If you fire on an unarmed diplomatic vessel from a neutral species that's actively trying to protect civilians, that's something else entirely. That's the kind of thing that ends up in front of the Galactic Concord, with every species in known space watching. The Thessari are many things, Commander, but I don't think you're the kind of people who want to be remembered as the ones who destroyed a ship full of scientists to make a point about mining rights." Silence on the channel. "I'm not a warrior," Elias continued. "I'm not a politician. I'm a cultural liaison with a coffee-stained uniform and a ship that couldn't outrun your slowest shuttle. But I'm between you and those civilians, and I'm going to stay here, because sometimes the only thing a person can do is stand in the gap and hope that everyone involved is better than the worst thing they're capable of." Seelith stood, motionless in the war room, her 4 eyes fixed on the display where a tiny blue dot sat between a fleet of warships and a planet full of miners. Her hands gripped the edge of the tactical console so hard the crystal surface cracked beneath her fingers. He was going to die. This foolish, brave, impossible man was going to die in the void, alone. Because he couldn't stop being who he was, someone who stood up, even when standing up meant standing in front of a firing squad. Just like he'd stood on the presentation platform. Just like he'd sat at the unpopular table. "Admiral Rethus," she said, and her voice was the voice of 27 empresses. "Emergency, acceleration. Get our fleet to Aethon in 2 cycles. Strip non-essential systems for power if you must. 2 cycles is, make it possible." She turned to Orthan. "Contact every Concord member species. Broadcast the Thessari's position and the Patience's transmission on every open channel. Make this the most watched moment in galactic history. Your radiance, that level of diplomatic exposure, is exactly what the Thessari don't want. Do it." Then she opened a private channel to the Patience. "Elias." A pause. Then, "Hey." His voice was steady, but she could hear the ship's stress alarms in the background. "So, funny story. Do not joke. Not now. Right. Sorry." Another pause. "Seelith, I need you to know that I didn't do this for politics. I did this because there are 12,000 people in that colony, and someone had to. I know why you did it. You did it because you are incapable of walking past someone who needs help, regardless of the personal cost. It is simultaneously the most infuriating and most extraordinary thing about you. Is this a compliment? It's hard to tell." "Elias." Her voice broke. For the first time since her mother's death, in front of her entire war room, the Empress of the Voronith Dominion's voice broke. "Do not die. I'll do my best. That is not good enough. It's all I've got. But, Seelith, whatever happens, I need you to know that these last few weeks, sitting at that terrible table, eating bad pasta, talking to you, that's the first time I felt like myself since Maya. You gave me that. So whatever happens, stop talking as if this is goodbye. Okay. It's not goodbye. It's see you at the unpopular table." The channel stayed open. Seelith listened to the sound of his breathing and the ship's alarms, and the vast indifferent silence of space for the next 14 hours, while her fleet pushed engines beyond their rated limits and the Galactic Concord's response network lit up like a neural cascade. The Thessari didn't fire. Whether it was the diplomatic pressure, the Concord's attention, or simply the absurd spectacle of one unarmed human refusing to move, they didn't fire. When the Voronith fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at Aethon in a record-breaking 2 cycles, they found the Thessari fleet already pulling back to the border, the colony untouched, and the TDV Patience still sitting exactly where Elias had put it. Seelith's shuttle was the first to dock with the Patience. She walked through the small ship's corridors. She had to duck through every doorway, The vessel was built for human proportions, and found Elias in the cockpit, still in his pilot's seat, still staring at the viewport where 14 warships had been hours ago. His hands were shaking. Not a little. The full-body tremor of someone whose adrenaline had been running at maximum for 14 hours, and had just received the invoice. "Hi," he said. She crossed the cockpit in 2 strides, dropped to her knees beside his chair. An empress kneeling. The palace walls back home probably shifted color at the very concept, and took his trembling hands in hers. "You are the most foolish person I have ever encountered," she said. "In any species. I know. You could have died. I know. You stood between warships in a survey vessel. I know. Saleth, I am speaking." Her grip on his hands tightened. Her secondary eyes were doing something they'd never done before, producing moisture. Voronith didn't cry. It wasn't biologically typical. But apparently, biology made exceptions for moments like this. "When I watched your ship on that display, I understood something I have been refusing to understand. I have spent my entire life being the Empress, being the bloodline, being the crown. And I told myself that was enough because it had to be. But you," her voice fractured again, "you sit at bad tables and eat terrible food and shake people's hands and tell the truth even when it costs you everything. And you make me want to be more than what I was born to be. You make me want to be who I choose to be." Elias freed one hand from her grip and did something no one had done to a Voronith Empress in recorded history. He reached out and gently wiped the moisture from beneath her secondary eyes with his thumb. "Saleth Ravaranis," he said softly. "I'm just a guy. I know." She leaned into his touch. "That's why I chose you." The political fall was, as expected, spectacular. Lord Vathis attempted a formal challenge to Saleth's authority, citing her attachment to a lesser species as evidence of impaired judgment. The challenge lasted approximately 4 hours before it was withdrawn, partly because the Galactic Concord had formally commended both the Voronith Empress and the Human Cultural Liaison for the peaceful resolution of the Aetham crisis, and partly because Lady Cathara had, in a closed council session, presented a detailed analysis of how Elias's actions had strengthened the Dominion's diplomatic position more in 14 hours than the Council's strategies had achieved in it. 14 years. "I still think he is absurdly fragile," Cathara told Saleth privately, "and his lifespan is a practical concern. I am aware of his mortality, Aunt. Are you prepared for it? No. But I was not prepared for my mother's death either. And avoiding love did not make that loss less devastating. It simply meant I carried it alone." Cathara was silent for a long time. Then she did something Saleth had never seen. Her crest shifted to the deep, resonant blue of respect. Not the formal respect of court. The real kind. "Your mother," Cathara said quietly, "would have liked him. I know. She would have found him baffling. And then, entertaining." They shared a look that held 3 decades of family history, conflict and care, and the particular stubbornness that ran through their bloodline like a fault line. The bonding ceremony was held on the singing moon of Aethon. It was small by imperial standards, only 200 guests, a fraction of what tradition demanded. The crystal formations hummed their ancient songs as Saleth and Elias stood before the resonance altar, where the living crystal would absorb and amplify the emotional frequencies of the bonding pair, projecting their true feelings across the entire moon's surface. There was no hiding here. The crystals would reveal everything: affection, doubt, fear, love. Every Voronith bonding ceremony held on this moon had produced a unique harmonic signature, a musical fingerprint of the relationship that the crystals would sing forever after. "You sure about this?" Elias murmured as they approached the altar. "Because those crystals are basically an emotional lie detector, and I'm feeling about 14 things at once. 14 is within acceptable parameters," she said. "Is that a joke? Did you just make a joke?" "Voronith do not joke. Voronith absolutely joke. You just hide it in formal language so everyone thinks you're being serious." She almost smiled. The crystals around them shifted to warm gold. The ceremony itself was simple. Hands joined on the altar's surface, a declaration of intent in Old Voronith, and then silence while the crystals listened. What the crystals sang was unprecedented. Every bonding ceremony in recorded history had produced harmonics within a known range, variations on the same fundamental Voronith emotional frequencies. But these crystals encountered something they'd never processed: human emotion. And Elias's emotional signature was not a single note or a structured chord. It was a symphony, chaotic, layered, contradictory, and overwhelming in its intensity. Love tangled with grief, joy braided with fear, hope wrestling with the bone-deep knowledge of his own mortality. And underneath it all, steady as a heartbeat, a simple, ferocious commitment that burned so brightly the crystals couldn't contain it in their usual harmonics. So they improvised. The singing moon of Aethon, for the first time in its geological history, produced a new song. Not Voronith, not human, something else. Something that had never existed before, because the two species had never stood together like this before, had never combined their particular frequencies of courage and loneliness and stubborn, unreasonable hope. The guests fell silent. Some of the older nobles, who had attended dozens of bonding ceremonies and thought they knew what the crystals could do, wept openly. Kythera stood perfectly still, her crest cycling through colors that had no name. When the song faded, Elias turned to Silith. "Was that supposed to happen?" "No," she whispered. "Nothing about you is supposed to happen." She kissed him. In front of 200 witnesses and a moon full of sentient crystals. An empress kissing a human cultural liaison with a coffee-stained dress uniform. The most politically inappropriate kiss in the history of the Voronith Dominion. The crystals sang again. A brief, joyful burst that sounded remarkably like laughter. Months later, a Solari journalist would interview Lady Kythera for a Galactic news profile on the unprecedented Voronith-human bonding. The journalist asked, with the careful diplomacy of someone aware they were treading on sacred ground, what made the Empress choose a human? Of all the nobles, the warriors, the diplomats in the galaxy, why him? Kythera considered this for a long time. "I asked her something similar," she finally said. "I asked her why she would bond with someone who speaks to her without deference, without formality, without regard for her title. He speaks to her like she's just a woman." The journalist leaned forward. "And what did the Empress say?" Kythera's crest shifted to that deep, resonant blue. The one that meant respect. The real kind. She said, "That's why I chose him."
Porque vamos a comprar una hamburguesa, güey.
Comida china. Álvaro no está.
Verga, jefe.
Ramen.
Ay. Como que se está afectando meter la panza, porque no mames. Ay, güey. Pero me veo divina.
Esta noche me voy a manosear. Cómeme a M.I.
¿Cómo? Aquí están las orejitas. Yo pensaba que estaban más chidas, pero son como de panda, güey.
Mejor algo en el drive-thru porque si no, se manosearán como pan de feria los chinos con ese luxito tan chavocho. ¿Cuántas horas vas a hacer hoy, Geritam?
No sé, la verdad, pues la que aguantemos. Yo digo que toda la convención, la verdad.
Y las otras orejitas.
Acá están también. Ahorita les pongo a ver qué les quieren, güey. Porque está siento que están
Un
muy...
sándwich del Starbucks.
muy grandes. Nah, ojalá pinche Burger King, güey.
Y el Q.
¿El qué? ¿Qué es eso, güey? A lo mejor ahorita nos terminamos comprando una de esta de gato también, güey. Una cola, güey, también. Ajá. Pero también caras, güey, las colas, güey. Se pasan de verga. $17.50 el dólar. Ah, la verga, está barato, ¿no?
Anal. Un flowcito de colita también.
No, güey. Déjenme en paz, güey. Ustedes quieren que me quede traumado, ¿verdad, güey? Disculpen el atrevimiento, pero nada siento.
Iñaki ya no vale nada el dólar.
No es usted. Sí, ya sé, Ido.
Son muy grandes las que vinieron con el traje, parecen de conejo, jaja.
Ya sé, güey. Parecen de conejo. Y va a aparecer el furro con esta mamada. Al corazón.
A ver, XD.
Y cada rato que me va a estar moviendo se escucha esta pendejada, güey. Mejor no.
A ver, voltea.
Espérame. Espera. ¿De dónde es usted? Yo no la recuerdo. Espera, espera. Espera. Espérate. Espera.
Como me gusta.
Hi, can I get the number 9?
Pero el resto del traje está bien bonito.
With cheese, please.
What size whipped cream?
Can you make it a large tater tots? And a large drink also? The diet lemonade?
Pero guapo mi compa.
And what was the drink again?
A large diet lemonade?
Anything else?
That's it, man. Instead of the fries, can you change it for tater tots? Is there any way? Can you?
I have to tell them, but there's no button for me to switch it.
Oh, okay.
But we can switch it out.
All right, perfect. Appreciate it, man. That's it, man.
Alright, your total's gonna be 1321. First one now.
All right, thank you, man. Appreciate it.
¿Vas directo a la convención o harás algún viaje?
No, vamos a la verga ya a trabajar. So, así se ven las orejitas, güey. Así se ven las orejitas, sí. Están tiradas, está más o menos, güey, porque
Tremendo hamburguesón, pero diet soda. A huevo.
Limonada. O sea, estas son las que vienen con el traje, güey. Y estas son las otras, güey. Pero estas ya están bien
Me
desgastadas.
salió feria en mi compa.
Ajá. Estas son las otras, están más chiquitas. O sea, estas están chidas. Pero no sé, la verdad. O sea, así están chidas, ¿no? Con el traje tirado.
Pero el resto del traje está bien bonito. Excelente compra, Jera.
Gracias, güey. Gracias.
Y la cola te la pusiste. Ceja.
¿Cómo?
Güey,
No.
jajajaja.
Güey, no me hubiera puesto gel, güey. ¿Para qué chingados me pongo gel? Salió Terry en el compa.
Como que están un poco caídas las del traje.
¿Cómo? ¿De qué hablas? Espérate, es que me desamarré esta madre también. Ahorita me la tengo que amarrar. Tin. ¿Y cuando voy al baño qué, güey? ¿Tengo que levantar el vestido?
Las orejas.
Las orejas. Creo que sí son, ¿no? O sea, van así bajaditas. Pero no, güey, o sea, con estas madres voy a estar hasta la verga, la verdad, güey.
Tienes que entrar a de mujeres.
¿Cómo?
Para el baño te tienes que agachar.
¿Cómo? No.
Eres una gatita triste sin flocito.
Mira, es que se mueven, cabrón. Ya mira. O sea, así no se ve mucho el tubito, güey. Y entonces, así. No, está muy separada. Así, güey. Ándale.